Hi, my name is Chris Little, and I am the host of The Lifestyle Chase. In 2018, I started this show to have meaningful conversations. I've interviewed over 100 different people, both in and out of the fitness industry. This podcast is something I'm incredibly proud of. Welcome to Season 4. Thanks for joining me. All right, so welcome to the Lifestyle Chase. This is episode 209. I am your host, Chris Little, and I am joined by the one and only Dr. Briana Botsford. Did I get that right?
You did.
Woohoo! So how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Today was an interesting day. Got the tires changed to winters. So got that taken care of because you never know when it's going to snow, but it always comes at the most unexpected time. One of my friends, Mark Zarrett, he often asks people, what's something that's made you happy in the last 2 weeks? And I like borrowing that one because that's a good one to kind of like set the tone for a conversation. So in the last 2 weeks, what's something that's made you especially happy?
It's a good question, and I like to frame my days when I come home from clinic and I've been in the clinic. I'll ask my husband, like, what was the best thing about your day? So similar question. And I think in the past 2 weeks for me, actually just that, like being in clinic and working with patients. I have a 5-month-old baby. So obviously I get a lot of joy from being his parent and hanging out with him. But it's also really wonderful to get into the clinic and connect with my patients. And I think connection is something that we're all really craving right now. And I'm certainly hearing that a lot from my patients in clinic. And so just being able to hold space for people, even if they're not feeling their best at this time, it still brings me a lot of joy to be able to connect with them and hold that space. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I can definitely agree with that whole like craving connection. I mean, just the last couple days, I've really noticed how I almost jump on opportunities to talk to people because it feels good for the soul. I find that I really get charged up through in-person training. Like every client kind of like adds to my bucket,
Yes.
which is like it's such an interesting thing because I'm fairly introverted, but at the same time, like working with people, I wouldn't be happy if I wasn't working with people. Like it's kind of like it's if I wasn't working with people, I wouldn't be as successful in the career path. I wouldn't put as much effort into it, etc. But like before we get too much further into the show, I really want the audience to know exactly who you are. Just like an introduction of yourself.
Absolutely. So I'm a naturopathic doctor. I'm in Edmonton. And my background is that I studied phys ed and life sciences at Queen's University. And then I finished up those degrees and moved to Banff, Alberta to I actually worked at the Fairmont Banff Springs for a few years as a fitness manager. And I worked as a trainer and managed the fitness center there. And people were always asking me what they could do to improve their health in many different ways. And I feel like trainers have that unique position where they get all these questions and you can have a lot of good answers for people lifestyle wise. And I felt like I wanted to learn more. So I went back to school at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine in Toronto for another 4 years and did my internship in the sports medicine program there because I was an Ironman triathlete and just very passionate about sports med. And when I graduated, that's what I thought I was going to do, is just 100% like work with athletes all the time. And what was really interesting was I sort of morphed my focus into women's health, but I still work a lot with all athletes, men and women. But what happened was there was a lot of patients who were athletes that were having just general health issues. And a piece of feedback I got from one of my supervisors in clinic, not my sports med supervisor, but another one, was that, well, you shouldn't work with athletes because athletes are healthy. They don't need you. They don't need your help. And that has turned out to be so wrong, because obviously athletes are humans. And, when I say athlete, I'm talking about anyone who trains intentionally. I don't just mean, an Ironman or a power lifter that's competitive or anything like that. I'm talking about anybody who trains with intention. And so obviously, all those individuals can have a variety of health issues, from digestive distress to hormone problems. And so that's kind of how I ended up shifting my focus to still work with athletes and active people, but obviously on their general health and well-being.
There was so much to unpack there. Like, you kind of got me thinking when you talked about Banff, because I find that so many people kind of make transitions where, like, maybe they'll work remotely, or maybe they'll find an opportunity with like the tourism space, or just
Mm-hmm.
like being able to hybridize fitness, being like a combination of like outdoor adventure and like indoor training. But I'm curious, what spurred the move into Banff for you?
That's a good question. When I was studying at Queen's, so I actually grew up in Vancouver. It just sounds like I'm from Ontario because did all my schooling out east. But and I say out east, and people from the Maritimes are like, "That's not the east." But I did my summers when I was at Queen's. I spent at the Kananaskis Golf Course, and I worked there in the summers. I just always wanted to check out the Rocky Mountains, and so I worked at that golf course as a server for my summers off between semesters at Queen's. And then I knew I wanted to land in either Canmore or Banff when I graduated. And so I managed to do just that. And it was amazing to live in the mountains. And I have so many friends that are still in Banff or Canmore, or they've moved on to other mountain towns, Golden, Revelstoke, things like that. And, I'm in Edmonton because I love Edmonton, and also because my husband grew up here and is born and raised Edmontonian. So we landed here, and I just love the community here, and that's why we stuck with it. So.
Well, I mean, that totally makes sense. Something that I've kind of like reflected on over my little mountain trips and stuff like that is like, oftentimes the grass seems greener on the other side. And it's not to say that one place is better than the other, but sometimes when we
Mhm.
really lean into what the place that we're in has, we almost get like a fresh outlook on it. Like, for
Mhm.
myself, I've really noticed that Edmonton has like this small town feel. Like, it feels like everybody
Yes,
knows everybody, and I don't know
totally.
how, but it like there was at least three people that told me to have you on this show, and so that's how like small town feel it is, because like my audience has enough people that like three of them were focused on the same person to unpack their story, which is super cool. With regards to your experience in the mountains, I've
Mhm.
found that everywhere that I've lived, whether it be a neighborhood or a community, has kind of taught me things, or like add a layer to my character. What are a few things that kind of stand out for you with your experience there?
I think it's just that it's community and the importance of community, because being in academia, you have a built-in community. There's people around you constantly that are your peers, and you don't have to work very hard to connect with people. When I moved to Banff, it was the first time that I had to learn what community really meant and what it meant to create that for yourself. And I think that is an extremely valuable skill. And like you said, Edmonton feels like a small town, but you still have to participate to create that community and those connections. And I think I really learned that and honed that skill when I was living in Banff. And I mean, you can't discount that the community that already exists, right? Obviously, there's many wonderful people that I met and that were already connected and had this sort of like network, and I was able to insert myself into that, and it really helped me emotionally and physically to meet people with, that were like-minded and shared my same values, instead of just being my peers that were in the same place studying the same thing, and that was our common ground. So I think, you know, it taught me the value of community and connection. And then when I moved back to Toronto, going from Banff to Toronto, like totally different world. And that was really challenging. But what I had to remember was that even though you're in a big city, you can still create that same community and feeling. And so I think, everywhere I've lived since Banff, I've been able to use those skills.
So I've found that for a lot of people, that sense of community is probably lacking, just like we reflected on, like feeling
Mhm.
connected. If you were to draw out like a blueprint as to how you have found community in your respective environments, what would that blueprint look like?
I think the first thing would be that you have to take risks. And I think as a fellow introvert, that is terrifying to put yourself in a vulnerable position. Um, I'll never forget, I went into the Lululemon in Banff, and I, was browsing, and I had like no money, but as I probably had no business buying $100 yoga pants, but that's sort of besides the point. And I was in there, and the manager, who's still a connection of mine, she said, "Oh, are you the new trainer from the Springs? And we're all going to 7 o'clock yoga. It's a pretty intense class, but like you should come and just join us and meet some people." And I was like, okay. And I went for it, and it was like so terrifying and anxiety provoke. Like I did not want to do it, because I was like, I don't know about this. And then, from just taking that one risk, for me, that was a risk. It doesn't seem like, I didn't, go skydiving or anything crazy, but like for me, that felt like a big risk to go and just join this class with people I had never met, and then socialize with them afterwards, and think that I had something valuable to contribute and they wanted me there. Like that was scary. I don't really know exactly why, but I think that taught me, that initial little risk taught me a lot. And then, so that's like the first thing would be, you have to put yourself out there and take risks and be okay with being vulnerable or saying something wrong or being uncomfortable, or even like realizing like, oh, like these are not my people. Like that's all fine, but you have to put yourself in those scenarios before you can find that out. And I think that's definitely the first step. And then intentionally maintaining connection, because if you're also meeting other introverts, or you're naturally introverted, you may not find it's easy to reach out all the time. And I think I see that a lot in my patients, and I certainly know that it's true for me, that I'm a lot better at checking in on how other people are doing than reaching out when I need something, or I need help. And I think that really solid relationships are built when we can ask each other for what we need, whether it's just a conversation or a walk or anything. You have to be able to initially make the connection and then continually connect with that person and follow up. Otherwise, the relationship fizzles. And I think right now that's been tough. Like I think we've all probably seen changes in our relationships and our communities over the past 2 years, because activities that we may have engaged in that kept us members of that group or what have you disappeared. And so really being intentional about continuing to connect, even if it's just a text message, I think that's part of the blueprint. And then celebrating each other and celebrating wins. If you see like, oh, hey, Chris, I saw you got like, number 2 in Canada for your podcast, or I don't know, whatever, right? Like you want to reach out and celebrate those things with those people that you're connected to, so that they know like you're thinking about them and you're celebrating them. And also not being shy to celebrate your wins. I think those things help us stay engaged with each other.
I mean, all of that is so true, and it almost seems uh, like it's such an echo of my own beliefs. So I almost feel I have a very biased podcast, but at the same time, I'm glad that you're able to like magnify that for me, because sometimes when I say things, it just kind of falls on deaf ears, kind of thing. Like people have heard it enough from me that they're not even listening anymore. So for them to hear it from your perspective and your life experiences is going to hopefully hit home for anybody that's left. With regards to like you talked about making those connections, sending people texts and stuff, like in like the weeks going forward, what does that look like for you in your life? Like I know how it looks like for me, but I'm kind of curious what your perspective with that is.
It's a good question. I think right now for me, everything in my personal life is centered around my little guy, and so I'm constantly reaching out to people to see if they want to meet me for a walk or that's my I do a lot of walking right now. And it's great, but I think as the weather is going to potentially change, I'm going to have to get creative about how I stay uh, engaged with people, and if I can't necessarily go for those hour-long walks. So bundling up, I guess, is one way. And then for me, it's also like, and I say this to my patients too, you have to identify warning signs or like signals that you're losing your connection or you're losing that social piece that lights you up. And for me, that warning sign often looks like sadness or isolation, like just, feeling down, because I haven't necessarily put the effort in, and you can't just rely on other people to do it, right? Which is easier. It's easier to wait for somebody to call or somebody to text, but they might be going through the same thing and they might really need you. And I've heard that from other people lately where I've been like, hey, do you want to, I'm just heading out for a walk. Do you want to come by and go with me? And they're like, we go for our walk and we come back to the house and they're like, gosh, I needed this. Thank you. And I'm like, actually, me too. And that's really validating. So I think for me in the next couple of weeks, it looks like, watching for warning signs that I need, or I'm lacking those connections and I haven't activated them enough, and just figuring out ways to maintain if I'm not able to go outside as much.
Definitely. Well, I mean, there's a lot there to kind of like reflect on, and one of my favorite pieces was just the fact that most often when we are feeling a certain way, the people that we care about also feel that way,
Yes.
even if they're like our role models or like the people who we think never feel pain, like they're just unstoppable, there's nothing that could ever take them out. They might even feel it more intensely than we
Mm-hmm.
do. In fact, like I'm sure most of my role models could confirm that for me, because it's just like everybody's human, and
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes people who stand out for caring deeply or for feeling emotions in intense ways, they not only feel the positive outgoing emotions, but they also feel the negative emotions that just like take them out of commission for the day, where like a text could be the one thing that turned their whole day around. Can you reflect on a time in the last 2 years when somebody else reaching out to you turned your day around?
Yeah, absolutely. So my baby was born 4 weeks early and it was a total surprise. We were so like, I was supposed to work until the 10th of June and my baby was born on May 19th. So you can imagine like the chaos that ensued with having, 4 weeks of patients that I had to reschedule and everything like that. Like, not to mention just like, surprise, you're having a baby today, when you thought you had another month. And so that was really shocking. And, birth and motherhood changes you in a lot of ways. But what happened for me was my neighbor, who I actually knew before I moved to the neighborhood, and I didn't know that she lived here. But she texted me shortly after the baby was born and said, what can we do to help you right now? Because I know you weren't expecting this, and I know that this was probably hard. She like baseline, it's hard, and it was 4 weeks early. And she set up what was called a meal train for us, where it was like it's actually a website where you can like people can sign up to bring you meals or to order you food. And that was like the most incredible thing postpartum or like any hard time in your life. Like get someone to set you up a meal train and have them bring you food, because I don't know, just taking that stress of like what's for dinner every night and knowing it doesn't matter, but like something's going to show up on our front porch at 5 o'clock was just magical. And that totally changed not only my day, but like she set it up for 3 or 4 weeks. So we had our community again, I could just send people the link and they could sign up if they wanted to or not. And that was just, so helpful and just totally made me feel so cared for and loved and valued.
Of all the meals that you had, is there one that stands out, like one that you just like you can't forget?
One of my colleagues signed up and she put in the notes that she wanted to order us sushi, because you can't have raw fish, very much, or you're not really supposed to when you're pregnant. And so she knew that sushi was something that I was really looking forward to. So that just, was a little extra icing on the cake that, she was going to send us sushi and we could just let her know what our order was. So that was cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So with your journey into being a naturopathic doctor, like I got that right?
Yeah.
So how were the first like 3 months? Usually the first 3 months of any role kind of feels like uncomfortable, or maybe there's like just a lot going on in your head. What was it like for you within that part of your life?
I graduated in May and I got what's called an interim license, where I got licensed by the board in Alberta provisionally under, like, I had another naturopathic doctor supervising me. So I was able to see patients and start my practice right away, but kind of with the safety net of having a mentor that was actually like liable for my patients, and I was practicing essentially under his license for the first 3 months, coincidentally, until my what's called NPLEX results came through. And so that's the board examination in North America. And then each province has their own additional requirements that you have to complete depending on which province you practice in. And so I was so fortunate to be able to have that sort of mentor to run everything by, for one, like go through case by case and get feedback. And, you graduate and you're able to practice. However, I think when you're out of the clinic, like out of the student teaching clinic, and you're in the real world, it's very different. And so that first 3 months having, it's almost like an additional residency or additional time where I was still supervised, was really helpful for me. And I think I don't know about the first 3 months, but definitely the first year. I was also brand new to Edmonton. So that's when I started building my community of primarily like athletes and active people. Like I remember there was a CrossFit gym that I'm still to this day connected with and love them and their family, and like the community is amazing. And I first connected with them to do nutrition talks. And like, that was one thing I went in and I was like, well, like, we're just going to take this risk and we're going to see how it goes. And 7 years later, like I'm still connected with the owners and their family and and the members. And there's people that I've known this whole time. And then same thing with like the triathlon community. Being a triathlete was like, all right, like I'm going to make some triathlete friends. And that's how I met Jess LaCourciere, who is one of my good friends. And she and I first met at swimming because I had found out about this, swim program. And I thought I would try that. And, I know that doesn't sound like it's related to being a naturopathic doctor, but it is, because you have to, for me to see the people that I wanted to see, i.e. athletes and active people, I needed to meet some of them, and I needed to get to know the stakeholders in the community so that I could help that community. Like I could do these nutrition talks, or I could, explain what naturopathic medicine is, because I think like that was my biggest challenge, was that I'm like, hooray, I'm a naturopathic doctor. Like I'm here. And people are like, what kind of doctor? and that I still get that, obviously, but like it's that was my biggest hurdle to overcome. And like for athletes and triathletes, CrossFitters, whatever, they're like, well, why would I need a naturopathic doctor? Now I feel like I don't have to answer that question as much. But that was my homework. That was my first year of practice, was like educating people about how I could help them. And then also actually doing things that had value for those communities, that helped them not only understand what I do, but actually helped them move forward with whatever their goals were.
Well, and I mean, I think that's so important for just about anybody. Like, if a trainer was listening to this, they could pick up some clues as to what they could do if they were feeling frustrated or if they moved to a new location. Just like, go and introduce yourself to people or be part of a community, or like demonstrate your value through different initiatives and events and conversations and connections, rather than like relying on just Instagram or just Facebook, because like most of the momentum that people get in their career comes from more than just like the digital space. As much as the
Yeah.
digital space can be a big leverage, like a lot of the things that work out for people are because of things that they did when like nobody was watching.
Yeah, totally. And like if somebody already has a trainer as an example, or someone in their network, and you're like, oh well, they already know so and so, so maybe they don't need me. Like, don't you never want to hesitate to still talk to people. And like I can think of chiropractors that I know like have naturopathic doctors in their clinics, even, or things like that, that I still wanted to meet, or go for coffee with. Like, you can still have common ground, and grow your community or your network, even if they already have somebody in their corner, kind of thing.
So with your clinic, tell me a bit more about like where you're based out of and what it's all about, and like just like what the inspiration behind it was.
So when I described like the first 3 months, I worked at that initial clinic, that I first joined when I moved to Edmonton, for 5 years. And then in the fall of 2019, I started thinking, okay, I think it's time to start my own practice. And part of the reason for that was that I wanted to have a space where we could focus on what we could do for our community, and not just provide our care, and visit with patients, but a place where we could potentially one day gather, and have some of these kind of community events and connections that I'm talking about. And so, anyways, I opened the clinic. It's called Flow Functional Healthcare. We're in central Edmonton, kind of Park Allen on 109th Street there. And initially I looked at the space in, like I said, fall 2019, and they got an offer, and I was too late, and I lost the place, and I was so sad. And because it was the perfect location, and I could visualize everything, and I was so excited. And then it just didn't work out. And then 3 or 4 months later, in January 2020, the landlord reached out and was like, are you still interested? Our offer fell through. So I bent over backwards to make it work in that space, and we did. And, March 11th, 2020, I signed my lease. And then what happened on March 12th? The NBA got canceled. So it was sort of like, oh God, what have I done now? Like, am I even going to be allowed to open? Are my renovations going to be allowed to happen? And it actually worked out so well that the renovations were able to go through, and relatively quickly, because a lot of people weren't working in that initial shutdown in 2020. And so we opened in July of 2020. And we started with just the two naturopathic doctors, myself and another Dr. Briana, funnily enough. And now we've grown. We have 3 naturopathic doctors. We have 2 office staff, manager and part-timer, and lactation consultant. So we have a focus on whole family health, which is really important to me. So, we talk a lot about women's health, but really we're invested in the whole family. And my niche, of course, is the athletes and active people. But as a clinic, our passion is, family wellness. So that's where we started and how it's going. And I'm looking for another naturopathic doctor right now, so I'm hopeful that I will get one in the next few months here, because we're busy and we're loving it, and it's worked out so well. Along the lines of the community, we haven't been able to have these community events that we wanted to have, but we've actually hosted some online groups. So and people have really liked it. We've gotten a lot of great feedback about our online programs, and that's going well. I'm really excited to hold them in person, but we haven't done that yet. So,
Well, I mean, all of that makes sense. Like, it's cool how things kind of just work out. It's kind of how we talked about earlier with you have to be willing to take a risk. And
mhm.
so starting things up and pushing through with them as like the NBA season cancellation carried forward.
Yeah.
As that kept going, like every step forward feels like a risk because you don't necessarily know the outcome. But the truth is, like, no matter what's going on in the world, we're not guaranteed to know the outcome. And I think when we're
Yeah.
able to accept that, that can be a helpful little like piece. But earlier, when we were talking about your experience in Banff, you talked about
Mhm.
values, how you were able to find people who did the same thing, but you still had to find people that shared your values. So, with that being said, if you were to unpack your values and kind of like just put them all out on the table, like what are your values?
Yeah, and it's a good question that I've actually been I feel like I've been trying to do a little bit of a refresh on my values in terms of how I articulate them, because but again, like having a new baby has changed things for me. But I would say um, my I used to be able to tell you exactly. I'd say radiant, luxurious freedom. Like that was it. Like those were my top three feelings that I wanted to have. And so when I talk about radiance, like what I mean is I want to feel like energized and vibrant, but I also want the people around me to feel that way. And so to me, radiance describes that really well, because it's like this, like your inner light or your inner self is just shining through. You're authentic, you're being real. You don't always have to be vibrant and energized, but you have that sort of underlying vitality that lifts other people up. And so that remains one of my core sort of desired feelings or values, if you will. And then now I think I understand so much more the importance of family. And I don't have a fancy word to describe what I mean by that, but other than, you know, my family, your family, like and almost like the collective family, like, we're all in this together, and how can we support each other, so that our families are well. And I think a lot of people have shifted in that idea in terms of, working from home and having to change, oh, the baby's crying, I got to go do that. Or I got to, like having these different, sort of tolerances for, our family's needs, and putting that, first, I think is really exciting. Instead of it being like a stress where we're like, oh, like I've got, I've got to make sure I maintain my relationship with my spouse and my kids, and then it's like we're actually like prioritizing that, and it feels different. Like it feels like we're more grounded in our family units, which I think is exciting. And I think because lots of us haven't been able to see our families or connect with our extended families, and whether that's our like friend family or our like blood relatives, the family we choose or the family that we have. I think, we all are changing how we value that because of not necessarily being able to see each other in person or have those hugs and that kind of thing. So those two things are really driving me right now. And then I guess like something that's really important to me is like continually educating myself. And again, I don't have I haven't refined my approach to how I identify this or say this, but I'm really stuck on staying current and educated. And I spend 3 hours a month minimum reviewing the most current evidence in my favorite topics that light me up, because I want to be able to serve my patients in a way that I'm on top of it and I'm staying current. Even though I'm only in the clinic 3 days a week, I think it's really important for me to stay informed and educated. And I think that's important for all like careers and people to stay engaged in your content and your material and your and what you, because it changes, right? The world changes, whether it's medicine or otherwise. Like we have to stay current and keep evolving, and the only way to do that is to consume reliable sources of information. And so I'm really trying to value continuing education, and just continuing, and that could mean, like I said, like my patient content or my actual like research journals that I'm reviewing constantly. But it could also mean making sure that I'm my best self and educating myself in terms of self-care and what's important in that way. So those are kind of my top three right now: that radiance, family, and then continuing education. And that's also reflected in our clinic, which is really important to me. Like at our clinic meetings, I bring my son, and my colleagues bring their kids if they need to. And that I wanted that. Like when I built the clinic, I was like, we have to have a place where we can gather when we need to, when we don't have childcare or otherwise, because women and men, we have challenges around childcare and staying in our professional life and everything else. So that value, just we really try and keep that up high at the clinic. Yeah.
I mean, all of that was awesome. Like it's cool because the way that you framed it was unique to the way I've seen it framed before. Like choosing a word like radiance, I was like, "Oh, that's kind of caught me off guard there." And it was just
Yeah, I bet.
the way that you were able to articulate it made me able to kind of understand exactly what that meant for you, which kind of made it mean something to me as well. Something that you also mentioned when we were talking about like your first 3 months, you had like a mentor. So when it comes to having a mentor, because I'm a big advocate of finding mentors in your life, both in your personal life and your professional life. They can be people that you've paid for their time, which I think you should pay for some people's time. And they can also be people that just come into your life and just you treat them with integrity and respect to maintain that connection, but they aren't someone that you're paying. What makes a good mentor to you? And we could like dissect that into two different categories. We can look at that as a professional versus a personal mentor, or we can just loop them all together and just a mentor in general.
So, yeah, it's a good question. I think mentorship has been critical to me and to my success. And I agree with you about paying people for their time. I have I have my current professional mentor, I'd say, is Dr. Jordan Robertson. She's a naturopathic doctor in Ontario. And I learned so much from her all the time. And whether it's, clinic ownership or actual like clinical evidence and things like that, I value her so much. And I love learning from her right now. That's where I'm at. And I think like what makes her a great mentor is, well, first of all, I think to be a great mentor, you have to be able to listen. And because I think when I have students, initially I would always assume that they want to just hear me talk. They want to hear me. They want to know what I know, but that's not always what's important to your student isn't always like what you think is important. So I think listening is really valuable as a mentor, like, and that's something that, if you can listen to your student or your mentee and understand the challenge or the question that they're asking you, you can draw from your experience in a more relevant way. And so I think that is one thing, and that's both like professional and personal. My personal mentors are women in my life that are athletes, but also mothers right now, and learning from them how they balance maintaining their athleticism and motherhood is just so cool to see, and to see women at different phases of their lifespan with that. And so that is kind of more of a like learning from example scenario, where it's less of a formal discussion and more of a, I'm going to observe you and how you act and how what you do, and take what I need and leave what I don't. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, you got it. You nailed it. Don't overthink it.
Okay.
The thing with questions is they're always like kind of open-ended and up to the interpretation of the person who's responding to them. And if I don't get what I want from the question, I just ask another, and that's the joys of being a podcast host. Something that I wanted to cover within this episode was just like the role that you can have as a naturopathic doctor on like women's health specifically. If we bring it to that specific point, and I could see how it could absolutely like change somebody's life, and how it could have like an unexpected outcome. Like maybe you meet someone who is a stranger and you're thinking that you're going to address a certain thing, and then it just like catches you off guard with just how all encompassing your role or your expertise in their life has been. Like, do you have any examples or times in your career so far where it's really just like almost caught you off guard or made you feel like this is why I do what I do kind of thing?
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think when like the first thing that we do is we try and like our initial visit with a patient is an hour or 75 minutes long. And so we'll go through that whole health history, you know, essentially it's like, tell me your life story with your health and every system of your body, and kind of try and figure out if there's a rhyme or reason to any like symptoms that a person is experiencing. But then also like educating and empowering that person to advocate for themselves within either the conventional medical system or otherwise. Because I think like is specifically with women's health, like now with social media, people are learning a lot more. You know, like historically, even for myself, like in the past, you know, talking about bowel movements and periods and stuff like that was like, oh my God, like we don't talk about that. And now like people post like, you know, all about their period on Instagram, and it, like, that's really cool. And we're changing the conversation, and there can be good things and bad things that come out of that. But I think it's mostly good that we're changing the conversation, and we're actually having these conversations now. And so for me, like, it's really neat when I have like a mystery patient, like a really difficult case, for example, where we're having like, you know, we can't figure out what's causing the issues. We've done all the blood work. And what always gets me is when somebody's really suffering, but all their lab work is normal or their imaging is normal, but something's wrong. They're not feeling well. They're not themselves. And it's not, you know, psychosomatic. It's real, what they're feeling. And I would even argue that that term is challenging in many ways. Psychosomatic, you know, like what you're experiencing is real. And so figuring out what has been missed and being able to educate and empower that person, get the right test, figure it out, get the answer. Sometimes we don't always get the answer, and that is the worst. But the best is when we do, when we find out, oh, like, actually you have a pituitary adenoma, and that's why you've had no period for 3 years, and nobody checked this one hormone that checks for that and did the MRI that confirmed for it, and now we know. And, you know, okay, here are the treatment options. And it's just exciting that, you know, I mean, it's a bummer that they've been suffering for so long, but it's exciting that we can change that experience. Same thing with people who are dealing with like perimenopause. Like that is like women in their, and I'll say like mid to early 30s, even more commonly like late 40s or mid 40s to late 40s, but like it can start early. And people's like emotions, their PMS, like they're like, I've had periods my whole life and now it's gone crazy. And they think they're crazy. and they're not. And it's so like uplifting and refreshing to be able to be like, all right, here's what you do with your nutrition, your exercise, supplements or herbs that you might need, or arguably we refer you, like if we need to refer you within the conventional system for hormone replacement, whatever it is. Like, it's life changing, first of all, to know that your symptoms are real, but to have that validated, that's like magic for me. Like when somebody is like, you're going to think I'm crazy, and I'm like, no, I'm actually really interested to hear what you have to say. And here's why you're right. And here's why your experience is common, but not normal, or, whatever. Just validating those symptoms and that person's experience. Like it that just lights me right up. But also I think it's really validating for a patient to be listened to and heard. And then if we need to go down that like complex road of figuring out what's going on, sometimes we go that route, but sometimes it's really simple. And half of the healing is being heard and validated, and knowing that you're not crazy,
Well, I think there's a lot of value that came from that, because oftentimes, like, I'll want to help people, whether it be in my professional life or my personal life, whether it be my clients or my friends. And I have to take ownership of the fact that, like, there's certain things that no matter how much effort I put in, that's not going to help them. And then sometimes just like helping them find the connections that they need is going to help them. So with that being said, in
Yes.
the interest of the people listening to this show that are thinking, okay, I am dealing with something like early menopause or something with my hormones or with my period or just anything like that, if they were to connect with you, like, because a lot of people are scared to make connections with a professional that they've never met in their life, even if there's like a form or an
Mhm.
email or anything like that. What would it look like for a person making their first connection with you? What would the experience be like for them?
So I mean, people can reach me in a couple different ways. Like, I have obviously my clinic webs. A lot of my communication is filtered by my clinic, and what I mean by that is like my office manager will actually, talk to people and explain what their experience is going to be like. But you can call the clinic, you can send an email, like you said, you can send a message on Instagram. If you do, I'll probably just say, please contact the clinic, because I can't answer medical questions without having a proper relationship with someone. It's just not ethical, right? But what I do is essentially, like, we have you fill out a health history form where I get a bunch of information to begin with. So like I'm already starting with a little bit more information than just, hi, you're so and so and I'm Dr. B and here's what we're going to do. It's giving me that background and that insight. And then our first visit is usually hopefully in person. I can see people virtually anywhere in Alberta, but usually we like to see people in person in case we need to do any kind of physical exams or anything like that. And so I my office is set up really intentionally with chairs that have no arms on the sides so that we can fit all bodies in our room. And that's really important to me. Weight bias in medicine is astounding. And I think having a space that any human can be in comfortably is really important. Our staff are so welcoming and want to greet you and have you feel comfortable in our space. And I think that's the most important thing to me, is that somebody feels comfortable, physically and mentally and emotionally when they come through our doors and when they come and sit down in my office, and knowing that it's a judgment-free zone. Like, literally anything that you have to say to me has value. And my job is not to place judgment on any decisions, past or present, that have been made. It's to listen and to educate and empower. And so it's, when people are like, oh, I don't know enough about this or that, and I'm sorry. I'm like, don't worry. Like, it's okay. Like, you're here to learn more. Like, education is like probably 50% of my job is teaching people in my office. And that's really important because, even if you come in and you're really educated, you've learned a lot about your condition or otherwise, like, it's important for us to be on the same page. And I will never discount the research that somebody has done on their condition. Also, my patients live in their bodies for as long as they've been alive, and they know their body best. Like, my job is just to help find insight. It's not to, when I say educate and empower, I don't mean to say, here's where you're wrong and no, right? Like, it's more like, okay, here's where we can connect some dots for you, kind of thing. So, I mean, the experience, once we've got you scheduled for a visit, I like to think it's a comfortable, inclusive and empowering environment. I think that initial like fear of reaching out is probably still real. And also, like, I think, lots of people are worried about what a naturopath is going to say, whether they're going to tell them like, oh, you can never eat gluten again, and you have to stop drinking alcohol, and all pharmaceutical medications are bad. Like, no, like, that's not what we do at my clinic. Like, we are not extremists in any sense. We and there's no judgment. Like I said, it's like, pharmaceuticals are necessary and life-saving. We know that. We're not trying to replace drugs. We're not going to put everyone on any kind of diet, let alone a gluten-free diet, unless it's necessary for whatever medical reason, right? So, I mean, people are afraid that we're going to make them make too many changes all at once or something like that. My job is to meet you where you're at. And so, okay, do you think these 3 things that we can implement today, do you think that's going to work for you? And let's talk about potential barriers, because that's another thing we know about behavior change, is that we have to identify potential barriers to change before somebody can, because they might hit those barriers or roadblocks, right? So we need to identify what that might be. And maybe a treatment plan that's a crazy restrictive diet and 19 supplements and everything else is not going to work. Like, that to me sounds really overwhelming, and I would never want that for somebody in my practice. So,
I mean, everything there I think is really important for someone that might be on the fence about seeing like a naturopathic doctor, because like it helps them understand what the actual expectations are rather than their like assumptive expectations.
mm-hmm.
Another piece of the puzzle is like, with your experience as an athlete, and we talk about like obstacles and overcoming obstacles, I found that people who have had to compete at high levels with their strength or endurance, they're able to take lessons from that and put it into like their professional life or their personal life. What are some of the top lessons that you've drawn from being a competitor?
That's a good question. I I think, to me, even in my life in general, I think endurance, and like, I could use the word, similar to how I said radiance before, like endurance, endure. Like, I think I'm built for endurance. I'm definitely not built for sprinting. Like, literally, I mean physically, I am an endurance athlete. But also, like, I went to school for 9 years. That's a long time to endure stress and exams and everything else. But I mean, in a professional sense, not that I feel I have to endure my career, but I think I have to appreciate that, medicine is a long game. Like, we're here for the long haul, and things are going to change. And when you're an endurance athlete, say you're competing in an Ironman, the conditions can change, whether it's, and not all of it is within your control. So whether it's the weather changes and it's suddenly raining on the bike and it's slippery and you have to navigate the turns differently or whatever, or, there's chop in the swim and you can't see the buoys because the waves are big, like whatever, like you have to adapt. Right. And I think that that's true, in my career, in my professional life, that, there's, when things change that are not within my control, I have to adapt. And I feel like everyone is like, haha, we've all had to do that the past 2 years, like, nice metaphor, but it's true. Right. And then, the other thing is like controlling what you can control. So even from a patient care standpoint, Um, I can only, and this was really hard when I started out, and I'm sure you feel it too, working with clients, like you can only do what you can do. You cannot value like your patient has to care as much as you do, or probably more, right? They need to care the most about their health and their changes and what they're doing. I care a lot, but I have to be able to park that sometimes. If somebody is not ready for the whatever change, or they're not able to invest in their health in terms of time or resources or whatever that means for them, like I have to be able to park it or turn it off if it's not, not going to affect change. Because and so I have to control what I can control. I can give the information, and my job, that's exactly what it is to give information, to explain pros and cons, because that's informed consent. Everything in your healthcare is a decision. It's not my job to make decisions for you. And I think we're finally moving away from that in conventional medicine and in general, where the patient makes the choice, right? And so I can only do my part, and I have to remember that. And it's the same thing when you're talking about competition. Like, you can only control what you can control. There's going to be things that happen that are out of your control, and you can only care so much, right? Otherwise, it's going to derail you. So it's and it's hard to not take. Somebody isn't able to make a change or do something, follow my advice for whatever reason. It's hard. Initially, I would always see that as a failure on my part, right? Because I care so much and I want them to be better and feel their best. But we have to find middle ground. Like, if someone's not able to make a change, it's on them. It is also on me. And so it's sort of like a mixed bag of applying that metaphor of endurance to my career, and then, controlling what you can control. And I think that's really served me well in motherhood too. Like, knowing that, like, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Like, he's 5 months old, but like, he's, fingers crossed, going to be around for a long time. And I want to maintain my mental and physical health, because I want him to have that as a good role model, and I want him to thrive as a human. So, yeah.
I mean, that marathon, not a sprint analogy, I've used that so much over the last while. And
Mm-hmm.
even for the people who are tired of like pivoting during the pandemic, like
Yeah.
it sucks, but it's something that we're all going to have to accept. Like, it's something that
Mm-hmm.
happens in all scenarios. Like, even like we talked about how values kind of evolve as different life things happen. And like,
Mm-hmm.
as people age, different like bodily functions change, our lives change, how we go out into our environment changes, our community changes. So pivoting is just like, it's a thing. It's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It's just we
That's
became
part of the
aware of it.
human experience, right?
Exactly.
It's just happened at a bigger rate in the past 2 years.
Well, it was big enough that people started paying attention. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, as much as the packaging sucks, it's a gift.
Yeah.
It's a gift that's going to help people get more out of their life, rather than letting it be numbed away by everything else that is out there, the things that make us feel broken, or the things that make us feel like we don't fit in, like we don't have a community, or that our health doesn't matter, kind of thing. Like, there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of different rabbit holes that we can go on, but hopefully people kind of got all the lessons and messages from that. And you made a mention about Lululemon earlier, which is super cool, because I have some connections with Lululemon currently. One
Yeah.
of their phrases is big, hairy, audacious goal. So if you
Nice.
had a big, hairy, audacious goal, what would it be?
Well, oh yeah, see, like, it's hard for me right now, like, because I feel like in many ways, a lot of my goals have gone on pause, which is sort of, it's weird to say that out loud, but I, like, my my big, hairy, audacious goal. I I wrote down on a postcard in March 2019 a question to myself, and it was mailed to me a year later, which was timely. And it said, how are you changing the face of women's healthcare in Edmonton? And so I don't know that I can give you like a specific big, hairy, audacious goal, but that's something that stuck with me because like while I've opened the clinic and I feel that we're doing that or we're trying to, I think there's more work to be done there. And I think I need to spend some time figuring out what the action steps are and how and what that looks like in terms of an actual outcome, right? Like how do we define that as an outcome? But that's something I'm really passionate about. And something and it's kind of more like a feeling that I want is I want to feel that I am an authority when it comes to women's health and athleticism. And so that's something I'm working on. I want to feel like I'm speaking with authority here. I'm like, this is the way it is and what I believe and this is true. But like, to be humble, like I think I have so much work to do to learn and to research and to be able to present information in a way that's more articulate, and be that authority and be that resource. Like that's, and again, I can't really define it as a SMART goal or whatever, because I haven't nuanced that out yet. But those are the two like big things in my world that I'm really focused on, or that I want to be focused on. And right now I'm just in a holding pattern where I'm kind of getting used to being a mom, still a business owner, and working out as an athlete. Like juggling those three balls right now is about all I can handle. But I know there's more. And I know I'll be ready for it. And I think sometimes it's okay to sit back and have that bigger perspective. Maybe I'm just telling myself that it's okay to pause and redefine. And so it's actually kind of where I'm at with big, hairy, audacious goals.
Well, there's a lot of relatability there. Like for myself, something that I've learned about my personality and how I see things is I set like goals for myself that are like unfeasible, like they're out of reach, but I'll work for them, and so they motivate me. But with that being said, sometimes I don't take the time to look closer and see where I've actually achieved some of my goals. And so I've never taken the time to win, like to feel that win, to really soak it up. And so my challenge for you would be to find different ways to look at everything that you've done in the last 2 years, to be able to like gather up some of those wins, because that's what sparks the momentum that creates the sort of like that compound effect of continuing to improve and learn and grow and maintain and get that momentum and speed. But with that being said, on most of my episodes in the last 100 episodes or so, I have the guest give the audience a challenge for the day. If you were to give the audience a challenge, what would it be? Whenever you're ready, you can just be like, your challenge for the day is, and put it out there.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I struggle with right now, and I think it's important for all of us. I would challenge you to rest with intention and not feel lazy about it. Because I think for me, that's really, and I know for other people too, when we talk about being go-getters and everything else, it's hard to pump the brakes and rest and not feel like you should be doing something all the time. So I challenge you to rest with intention, refill your cup, like do something that is really restorative for yourself, and don't feel guilty or lazy.
So to help people carry this out, what does resting with intention look like for you in your life?
Oh yeah. Okay. Honestly, reading a novel, like reading for fun, because I read so much for education, and so reading for fun is really my rest. Putting my feet up and being supine and reading for fun.
That's awesome. So, in the interest of time, that basically wraps it up for the day. But thank you so much for joining me on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you on the Lifestyle Chase.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.